All right, it's gone 1 o'clock. I don't know whether Shelley's there or not, but we'll keep moving.
Yeah, I'm here. It's just I'm trying to plug back in again because I'm flat.
Okay. Couldn't possibly comment. Geez, that's put me off, Shelley. Okay, David, we've all read your submission. We've got it in front of us. You've got 10 minutes, including questions and answers and that. So the next 10 minutes is yours, David.
Sure. Have I managed to share my screen
Yes,
successfully?
you have. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Awesome. Thank you very much. And I'm pleased to be here after a break, so everyone's awake and perky. We wouldn't have seen as many submissions from the Huntly area as we would have thought. We wanted to have the community board meeting before we and get to know all the facts before we put in people and get people's responses from the community. Unfortunately, after our community board meeting, things went into lockdown. So the night we were actually running the workshop, everyone was preparing for lockdown and for buying liquor and groceries and everything else that was more important. So we won't have seen the submissions that we likely would have seen if we hadn't gone into lockdown. So I just want to mention that.
The only thing to that, David, we did accept late submissions that came in up to a week late. So they still had the opportunity to submit them.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, but the focus was kind of lost and, not there. This is a map which I hope you all have seen and have spent some time looking at. This is the Reshape Waikato survey output. And as you can see here, we've got Ngaruawahia there in Huntly, and there is no connection from Huntly anywhere south. And no one, and this is an important point, and the key point here is that no one in the whole of the Waikato connected Huntly anywhere south. And I'm actually absolutely appalled at how the council could put out a map completely against what all of the people of the Waikato said. And so to me, there needs to be some quite serious questions asked at how we produce the map of a ward, putting Huntly in with Taupiri and Ngaruawahia when no one in the whole of Waikato saw a community of interest there. So to me, that shows something's quite fundamentally broken in the process if the output can ignore all the district-wide input. And you've got to ask the question, why did we do all the focus groups and why did we do all that hard work up front if we're going to ignore it in the final product? And people often complain to me and they say basically, why engage with the council? Because they never listen and they do what they want. And when things like this occur, it makes it really hard to say the council listens because clearly the council hasn't. And lastly, I would point out that this slide, that Huntly is growing and it's growing in the northern directly towards Hiniwai over the next few years. And so it's pushing up and I guess growing away from Huntly in a northern direction, not in a southern direction. This is the yellow is what was put out for consultation. I wanted to make sure that it was possible to divide the central general ward up into 2 wards in a logical place. For me, it was important that maybe the line that could be drawn between Ngaruawahia and Huntly might turn in some funny place, like through the middle of Taupiri and having one half in Huntly and one half in Ngaruawahia or something silly like that. But as you can see on the right-hand side, if we divide the central general ward into 2, you get Huntly nice and neatly and Ngaruawahia in the south, and the line runs through, I guess, the Taupiri mountain there. So it's a very, very clean line. And so there's the opportunity there to divide it into 2 separate wards. And so to me, I think about what happened in the process that resulted in these 2 wards, the Ngaruawahia ward and the Huntly ward, being conglomerated into a central general ward. And to me, there's something fundamentally not quite right there because the 2 variables that are supposed to be taken into consideration is equal number of the public per ward and communities of interest. And so to have the central general ward as one big ward like that tells me that there's actually a 3rd variable that's unlegislative that's driving some of these decision-making processes, and that I find quite concerning. One might expect now for me to list out ad infinitum the communities of interest between Ngaruawahia and Huntly and why these are fundamentally different and there's no fundamental communities of interest there. However, I'm going to talk more about the Huntly Community Board, because if I believe that if the whole of the Waikato district, with all the focus groups and all the information that was put forward, said that there was no communities of interest between Huntly and Taupiri or Huntly and Ngaruawahia, and we end up with a ward with Huntly in with Taupiri and Ngaruawahia, that anything I say won't be listened to anyway. If I present information which all the residents have already presented, and to me, I question whether that would be ignored or not. So I will take questions at the end, obviously. But the Huntly Community Board was asked to give some feedback as well around certain things, including our name. And at a workshop, it was decided that it was important to include Rahui Pōkeka in the name. It's the Indigenous name for the area. And this was ignored in the recommendation, and the consultation came out without any mention of Rahui Pōkeka in the name. And we, as part of this process internally in the workshop, we looked at our boundaries and questioned what was the Huntly Community Board. And so we said, we've got two things that we think we should define principles we should have. One is that we're the Huntly urban area. And secondly, we're the associated lifestyle blocks right on the boundary of the urban area where people would consider themselves part of Huntly and Huntly urban, even though they're slightly more rural. So this was the community board boundaries that came out in the consultation document. And down here is where I'm going to talk about next, and that would be the southwest part of this area here. So zooming in here, this is the current Huntly Community Board boundary, and this is the boundary we requested through here. And this is why we requested it. On one side of these photographs is the Huntly Community Board ward are in, and one part they're out. And I've actually forgotten which is in and which is out. I'm sure I could look it up. Actually, now I've figured it out. But if you look at these two pictures, they both look the same. They should both be in the ward. They're on the same street, same density. They should be included. Also, there's a road here, Hillside Heights, which won't be obvious unless you know the area, but this road up here, this is called Hillside Heights Road. And we had someone who wanted to stand for the Huntly Community Board, and so they did their paperwork, got it signed off by someone who lived on this, as they assumed that that person who lived on the street was actually part of the Huntly Community Board. And by the time the information came back that they were not part of the board, and so therefore the submission form wasn't valid, it was past the closing date for submissions, and so therefore we didn't have a candidate running for the community board because both the candidate and the person living on that street assumed they were part of the board. And so therefore there's a community pull for this area to be part of the community board. Looking now at this small area here, just to the west, this is a close-up of the area where the current community board boundary is in green. And so the current community board boundary runs down the centre of the street here. And on one side of the street, we have lifestyle blocks, and on the other side of the street, we have lifestyle blocks. In fact, more lifestyle blocks and a higher density. And so we believe that community board boundary should include the small area here, making it a nice, cleaner edge, and actually include the lifestyle blocks on both sides of the road and not just one. And lastly, looking at this area here, this area that has been pushed out here was mostly in accordance to what we asked, but right at the end, at this point, we asked that the line go through the 100-kilometre zone change up here, where we go from an 80 to 100. So that's obviously where the voting people think it goes rural. But the proposed line that came actually out in the consultation document is on this red line here, and it misses the, people call it a marae. I don't know if that's technically true, but it's at least a kohanga and has a marae associated with it, a meeting place. And the person that actually lived here on this section here, because there's a house now there, came to our community board meeting to point out that she was still outside the proposed boundary, and she requested to be inside it because she didn't think that the line here was right. It should go above and include in the houses in the Tiohaki area. And we had lots of people, well, a handful of people from Tiohaki complaining at the last election that they couldn't vote for the Huntly Community Board. And I quote, "Well, there's no point voting then, is there?" End quote. because their motivation to vote was actually to vote for the community board. And lastly, you'll see that there's a huge amount of area on the my right-hand side of the screen, out east of the Huntly area, and the new state highway runs almost through the middle of the ward. And so obviously on the eastern side of the expressway, that is not urban, that is not Huntly urban, that is not Huntly lifestyle blocks. And so therefore we can't in good conscience say that this is a core part of our ward or should be part of our ward. And so we submitted that the line, I'm sorry, this won't come through particularly well, but the new line should come around, still include Kimihia Lake, the existing Kimihia Lake, because that's an important part of the identity of Huntly, and include the residents that are on the old Fisher Road. That's been a name change through here. So
David, your 10 minutes is up, mate. I need to put
okay,
you up
that's
again.
good,
Okay.
because this is the last slide.
Okay. So look,
done.
can you go back to the yellow one?
Sure.
And I'll just make a comment. Yeah, that one. So look, I looked at this and made inquiries with staff. That extended bit that goes down Te Ahaki Road and then around the marae there, you can't just arbitrarily draw a line. You actually have to include a mesh block. So that is actually part of a mesh block in there. So that's my understanding of it. Because I said, well, why don't we just draw a line around there? And I says, no, if you want to include them, you've got to take in another mesh block. You've got to take in another mesh block. So when I look at that area up in the hills where the expressway went through, that is all part of a mesh block that relates back to Huntly. I know nobody lives there, but that's what it is.
That's interesting to me. That's a big failure then in communication, because when the information came to the Huntly Community Board, none of that was there. And so therefore our discussions didn't centre around mesh blocks, because we would have asked for a mesh block and tried to figure out what the best mesh blocks were, but no one mentioned anything about that. And so to me, that's a big failure. So we get to the end of the process now and we found out key information that we should have known at the start of the process. That really ticks me off. So
that's all right. Look, David, I'll have to let you go. You're way over time and I've got other people waiting. So look, thanks for your submission.
no problem. Happy to
okay
answer
then.
questions offline.
Yeah. Okay then. Thank you. Right. Have we got anybody waiting? We do. Where's Galen?
We have Alan and Bronwyn Kasuf.
Okay.
So page 57, submission number 2073.
Are you two online? Would you like to turn your microphone on?
Okay.
Hello, Bronwyn. Hello, Alan.
Hi.
Hello,
How are
Alan.
you?
Hi, everybody.
Hi, good, thank you.
Good. Good to see you two are doing this together
Yes, at our home.
at home. Good on you. Good on you. Hey, look, we've got your submission in front of us. We've read it. Processes, you've got 10 minutes, and that includes any questions from the councillors. So the next 10 minutes is up to you.
Thanks, Alan. Afternoon, councillors and associated people. Right. We live in Huntly, as you're probably all aware, and our proposed ward is General Central. So that's Huntly, Taupiri, Ngāwaki, Hinawai, etc. We marked our submission in support of the overall draft initial proposal because of two items. It maintained the ward system of community representation and it maintained the community boards. So we're strongly in favour of both those things. So that's why we marked our proposal as an affirmative. However, we do have reservations and we'd just like to talk about those now so that you understand our submission. We believe all people living in an individual wards must be fairly represented at the council table. We disagree with the allocation of only 2 councillors to the central ward. The central ward is contains the biggest urban centres in the district, and people living together have the greatest issues for council to deal with. Therefore, they need proper representation at the council table. The population of the Central Ward is approximately 26% of the total population of the district, and that should give the ward a minimum of 3 councillors, if not 4, out of the 13 councillors, so that proper representation can occur. Under the proposed new ward system, the Central Ward system loses the Maori residents to the Maori ward, and we drop down to 2 councillors because it has only 15% of the population base then. The Maori residents are now excluded, and yet they still live in our area and in our ward. Based on the proposed system, Maori will have no representation at local community level, which we are strongly advocates of, as they have 2 Maori councillors who will represent the whole of the district, and Maori are excluded from voting for the community representative where they live if they are on the Maori roll. Maori on the Maori roll will only have representation at the district level because there's only 1 Maori ward. Their representatives will have to abstain from voting where council's discussions involve multiple wards which are in conflict. This representation is designed to remove the community input into choosing their representatives. Based on that, we would like to advocate the solutions are as follows. Our preferred solution is that the 2 Maori councillors be in addition to the existing 13 councillors. The councillors per ward would be set up by the number of people living in the ward. Even though those Maoris on the Maori roll did not vote for the ward councillors, they would still be represented at the council table by the area they're living in and all the issues that go with those areas as individuals. That would mean our ward or the Central Ward would have at least 3 councillors. Our second alternative, which is the second preferred alternative, would be that the councillors propose that the number remain at 13 and the Maori ward be split in 2. Because the Central Ward has contributed 50% of the Maoris elected on the Maori roll, there will be 1 ward for the Central District and 1 ward for the rest of the district. That would mean that our ward would have 3 councillors, 1 Maori and 2 non-Maori. Our alternative 3 is that if the current proposal goes through, we would like that Huntly and Ahiniwai be split from Ngāwākia and Taupori and associated districts, and each district have its 1 councillor. So that would be going back to what you proposed, which would be 2 councillors only, but they would be designated for particular areas. As you will see from we are firm advocates of individual communities having a good representation at the council table where the decisions are always finally made. We'd even go so further to state, and you might think this is a really, really dumb idea, that the number of councillors should be significantly increased. The workload on individual councillors, I think, is huge, with the amount of legislation from central government coming out and being forced onto the councils. So we don't think there's enough heads there now to go around. We also, which is probably more importantly, we would like to wrestle control back from the bureaucrats of management and change the mentality from a can't do attitude to a can do attitude, and to serve the aspirations of the council, will reflect the views of the communities they represent. We're firm advocates of that. You vote, you have 1 say, and that's when the elections come up, and we vote for our representative who reflects our views and takes those to council. Without that 1 step, then the system is flawed. That's the rest. That's all I'd like to say at the moment. Brian?
Okay, so just going back on the fact that you've got the 2 Maori representatives and they span the whole district. I mean, you take that model and you apply that to central government and what they have a Maori electorates, but they have their areas. They don't have two councillors going across the whole of New Zealand. They have their different areas. And you have Northland because you have a Maori delegate for Northland because that's their delegate, you know, that's where they represent those people in Northland. They don't represent the whole of New Zealand and are there for that reason, to represent them. And the model that you've got is yeah, I don't think it's right.
Okay. So look, Bronwyn, we're running out of time, but all I
Yep.
would say is, so the reason why we put it out at large was because we didn't have, I won't say not the ability, but we weren't keen on drawing lines on maps. When you work in the Maori world, they think differently to us. Last thing we wanted to do is cut hapu in half and different iwi groups and all that sort of thing. So it's incredibly complex. So I challenged Tainui to actually come up with a map, which they actually have come up with a map to split. It means it's been done by Maori for Maori and not done by us for them. You get what I mean? So if you have got the ability to go and look at all the submissions, the one from Tainui, you'll actually see a map that they've worked with our staff to actually formulate to give that north-south split.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
We are adamantly opposed to, Alan, that the number of the number of new councillors be taken from the pool. You know, I think it's a fundamental thing that we would like to see. If you're going to add Maori wards, they should be in addition to the existing councillors.
Yeah. Okay. So look, I'd get into a real hole if I start talking about that, and I don't really want to talk about it because there is a formula that we actually, like everything, there's a formula and a process we have to follow, and I don't expect everybody to understand it. It's bad enough for us to understand it sometimes, and we don't always get it right. But at least people have submitted on what's been put out there, and I thank you for that. So I'm going to ask you, the councillors, if they've got any questions of Bronwyn or Al. But look, you can be assured that we will take into consideration, because there's been some great points made over the last 2 days in this hearings, and I am sure that the end product won't be the same as what's on there now. There will be changes to it in one form or another.
Cool. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Be safe.
Thank you.
Catch you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh, sorry, you're still there?
Yes.
I do have a councillor's put a hand up the top there. Councillor Gibb, you got a minute left.
Thank you. Thank you for your submission. I'm interested to know if you did split that central ward, why would you stop at Ohiniwai? Would you consider going further up the highway or not?
Definitely, Janet. Yeah, it was just an arbitrary thing, Huntly North, and now Rocky would take the South-East South.
Okay, so you still see an affiliation further up with Rangariri,
Definitely,
or even to Kowhara?
definitely.
Okay, thanks very, very much for that, both of you.
Thank you, team.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
bye.
Alan. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Right, Galen.
Our next submitter, who is Tony Perkins, is not here.
We're not running ahead of time, are we?
5 minutes.
Well, we are. Oh, mind you, Tony. Oh, Tony was down for 12:30, 1:30 anyway.
And we had that withdrawal at 1:20.
Okay, cool.
Perhaps, Mayor Allen, do you want to talk about how we're going to finish up this afternoon?
Yeah. Well, what have we got left? Tony, about 6 left this afternoon. So the idea this afternoon is we'll have a bit of a wrap up. I'll talk to some of the things, and Axel's going to deal with some of it. This is pretty broad, this thing. So I've asked Axel to talk around some of the mapping stuff, and I'll talk about some of philosophical stuff around some of the stuff that's come out, if I can remember it all. I've got a heap of notes here, so if I can decipher my own handwriting, we should be able to get there.
So what we hope to do between those two bits, and I'll say it now just so that you've all got a chance to sort of think about that, mull it over and be prepared for that, is that we will try and capture some of the themes that we've heard. So this is not making decisions. This is not actually saying what we agree with or what we don't agree with, but really it's about capturing some of the things that we've heard through submissions, as well as what we've read from the people who've submitted in writing and may or may not have appeared in front of us. And from that, pulling out some of the themes where we might want more information or more mapping type data when it comes to deliberations next week. Because that enables Anton and Galen to do some work between now and then. So rather than us sort of sitting there next week in deliberation saying, oh, I wonder if we could move this boundary or not, it actually takes some work, as we know by Anton, ahead of time on the maps to sort of see what does it do for the percentages and that sort of thing. So if you can just have clear in your own minds by the end of the day today, which is, about an hour or so away, hour and a half maybe, hour and a bit, what those things are, so that we can give some guidance to, without decisions, but just guidance as to what we might want to see come back in time for our deliberations. Have got that about right, Alan?
Yeah, so no, that's right, Axel. And look, so think long and hard about that. So as soon as the last submit is finished, we'll get into that, because I need to wrap up by 3:30. I've got other meetings this afternoon. My world still goes on. So I've got appointments that I need to be online for. So yeah, so just give a bit of thought, give a bit of direction to some of that mapping stuff and some of those themes.
Can I ask something?
Yes, by all means.
So we go into deliberations next week?
On Tuesday.
Yeah. Are we able to come in to go over those deliberations, or do we have to do it by Zoom?
No, I have to do it by Zoom, Shelley, because it's too difficult. I think we're all better like this because, I had this discussion with Galen and Matt. Originally, they sort of talked about me coming in and being in the office with them. And I said no, because I need to be on my own to do the Zoom. And the trouble is, at the moment, we can only do things by Zoom because you've got both Jackie and Stephanie that are in the north and not likely to be out of the north by Tuesday at the earliest, probably not out for another couple of weeks or so. So I just think the easiest way is to do it on Zoom.
It's really hard to discuss things on Zoom.
I know, Shelley, but it's a world we're in. I can't do much about it.
So it says in the newspaper that you can be indoors if you're a metre apart, like cafes and so forth.
No, it's 2
So
metres.
it says in the newspaper one.
Do you believe everything in the paper, Shelley?
It says that in
I can assure you, Shelley, it is 2 metres, not 1 metre.
Oh, well, I'll show you what it says.
Well, that's all right, but it's 2 metres.
It's not an article. It was a statement of the rules for level 2.
Okay.
Anyway.
So,
Okay,
mate, is Gavin there?
He is there.
Yeah.
Gavin, can you talk about access to the office?
So, okay, so this will be an open workshop. I mean, it'll be an open meeting. So if you choose to come in, if it was in the office, there would also need to be ability for the public to also be there, which would mean you would need to, I would imagine, need to wear masks. And in fact, at the moment, we're not allowing public past the front counter because to protect our staff effectively.
So public are going to be a part of our deliberations?
Well, it's a public meeting.
Okay.
So it's an open meeting in which anyone can come along. And I think the other thing is appreciate what you're saying, councillor, but you've also got to look at the situation for Councillor Henderson and Councillor Church. It's incredibly hard if you have everyone in, and we've seen this, if you have everyone in the room and a couple of people that can't be there through no fault of their own, and it leaves them out of that conversation. It is much easier if it is a consistent conversation with everyone on the same basis. So, and in terms of what you've said, in terms of people in a work environment can be 1 metre apart, but members of the, with people that are not part of that work environment, it's 2 metres. That's the rules. That's what's been specified.
So would I be able to have a copy of all the submissions and the proposed maps? Because I've only got my iPad.
But you've got the submissions though.
On my iPad. So I can't get out of Zoom and go to the agenda and look at the maps and then come back onto Zoom.
Gayleen, if I may, do we have spare copies that were, physical copies that were held at libraries and offices? One of which could be about, no, there was no physical copy anywhere?
There were no physical copies done of these agendas because they were all going to be via Zoom. And so they're all electronic. And even in our libraries now, they're accessible on the computers there.
It's actually over 800 pages. And I'm loath to print 800 pages along, you end up spending hundreds of dollars printing maps and pages that will never get looked at again. Probably the better way to do it would be to facilitate a second machine for you.
Okay.
I'm happy to, I've got a spare one if you'd like me to set you up, Shelley.
Okay. So I just want the information. I just want to be able to see the maps because I don't actually have copies of the maps in the first place that council came up with because I was away. And so I just want to be able to have the information. That's all.
Okay. So the maps we're dealing with now could look totally different next week though, Shelley. That's the trouble.
Yeah, well, see that's why not being
what the maps will look like. So I don't want to put something that is of no use or value. Jan.
Just wanted to say that you can minimize your screen and go into any document. So you can minimize your Zoom screen, go and read the document, have the document open, and then put your screen back onto Zoom without going on and off Zoom.
Yeah, thanks, Jan.
Gayleen's going to tell me somebody's here, is it?
Yes.
Yeah, thought so. All
We
right,
have
everybody.
Tony Perkins, submission number 1891, page 246.
246. Hang on a minute. Page ready. Right, have we got Tony? Here he is. Afternoon, Tony. Can you hear me, Tony? Tony? No, turn your microphone on, Tony. You on now? I can't hear you, Tony. No, your microphone's turned on, but you've got something turned down.
Yeah, something keeps unmuting. Is it working now?
Yeah, I can hear you now, so stay close.
Okay.
Okay, Tony, look, we've got your submission. We've read your submission. You've got 10 minutes. And that includes any questions. So the floor is yours for 10 minutes.
Okay, all right. Basically, what I've looked at is the communities of interest, effective representation of communities of interest, and fair representation for electors. Now, these guidelines are pretty well defined in terms of what is a community of interest. And as you've seen in my submission, I don't believe Huntly and Narrawahia are common communities of interest. They've been separated for a long time. Huntly obviously is a coal mining town. Narrawahia, basically the centre of the Kingitunga movement, and of course the biggest employer would be the meatworks. So I don't see those as common interests. The fact that they're both on the river is not what I consider relevant. So I don't believe those two should be pushed together. Without sort of splitting hairs, a lot of the numbers don't tie up. I've got 49% as opposed to 55% Maori voters. And not that makes much difference. It's around a 50-50% split. And numbers vary. You'd need a crystal ball to do future planning, and I do appreciate that. But by adopting the Maori wards without proper consideration to how this could be fairly implemented within the guidelines of the Electoral Act, will cause a problem of fair representation in the future. I have no doubt that there exists sufficient candidates to represent a Maori voice on council, but to force the role onto those that are not interested in the political arena risks poor quality decision making. The population split of voters in both Huntly and Narrawahia is approximately 50-50. Any candidates representing Maori in these wards would be elected if the registered voters preferred those as the candidates. Engagement in local politics is the real issue, not equal representation. I believe that by adopting the government's recommendations without planning has left the council staff little time amid the 10-year planning phase to not only find a reasonable solution, but to consult with local communities and those on the Maori roll as to their actual preferences. I believe this will cause resentment for many years to come. And I've looked at the determination, which is here somewhere, by the Electoral Commission in 2019 for all the references as to what should and shouldn't be taken into account. And one of the things that I noticed is that the plus or minus 10% on the number of voters has been considered basically a key interest, whereas in fact it's not hard and fast. There are issues where you don't have to comply with that. The plus or minus 10% rule for territorial authorities in some circumstances can be, you can go outside them. Non-compliance is required for effective representation of communities of interest. Compliance would limit effective representation of communities of interest by dividing communities of interest, and compliance would limit effective representation of communities of interest by uniting two or more communities of interest with few commonalities. And I think Huntly and Narrawahia would be a classic case for that, because they also mention sport. And as we all well know, Huntly and Narrawahia compete sport and have done for years. And like I said, I don't believe this is wrong, but I believe it needed another 3 years before the changes were made to basically get a better feel from people, from the voters, as to what they actually wanted. And if it is what they want, that's fine. But from the 20th of May, it didn't give you much time. It didn't give council staff much time to get out there and look for alternatives and have a look and see what people actually want. And the consultation process was limited to certain groups. or people identified as groups of interest. So again, I feel that it was somewhat rushed and it sort of pushed you into a bit of a corner in terms of how do you get this sorted out. I don't feel Horritu residents, and I've spoken to a couple, they are not particularly keen on being ripped out of Narrawahia just to make the Tamaheri, Eureka, Newcastle group meet the numbers. So again, I don't think it was necessary to do that because you don't have to meet the numbers. That's about it. Any questions?
Right, thanks, Tony. What I might do is ask, I might ask Dale to talk to you about the numbers. Dale, do you mind answering that?
Sure. So we were obliged under the Local Electoral Act to not use electors, but to use the electoral population. And that is to be either the last census, which was 2018, or the latest population estimates was at 30th of June 2020. So they are the figures that we are required to use. And to get the number, we use the Maori electoral population, the general electoral population. So that's the statistics to ensure that we have the fair representation and to apply for plus or minus 10%.
So is it fair to say that we can't step outside that 110%?
There is, the submitter is quite right. There is some leeway. It came into law in 2013 to we can go outside the plus or minus 10% if we have a very good case where to comply with the plus or minus 10%, we are grouping dissimilar communities together.
Okay, thanks, sir. Does that help you, Tony? Turn your microphone on, Tony, if you want to talk.
Right, it's on. I keep getting muted.
Yeah, okay. So you heard Dale? Oh, you're muted again.
Keeps disappearing on me. Yeah, my source for the numbers was elections.nz, stats research, and it gave me numbers which are a wee bit different from the numbers in the report. Now, I don't know if possibly the information I got was super up to date, in which case, of course, obviously you'd need a crystal ball for that. And it didn't change things a great deal, but it made me question some of the other things that are in your document, which says that some of the numbers that you came up with were based on projections from 2017, which are not going to be right. And because the more accurate numbers are available, I'm saying I think maybe the more accurate numbers should be used.
So the numbers, Dale, you want to answer that? Just stay online, Tony.
I'm doing my best.
We once we have a scenario, we put that scenario through the Department of Statistics, and they provide us the estimates or the figures that we must use. We start off with the figures that were provided by the Department of Statistics via the Local Government Commission. So all the figures that you see are actually the correct statistics that have come from the Department of Statistics based on the scenarios we have put forward.
At the time?
They are all the estimates as at the 30th of June 2020, which is the latest ones and other figures that we must use.
Okay.
We don't have any choice in that, Tony. They're set by Department of Statistics.
Yeah. Well, as I say, that's where I got the numbers from. The problem I have is, of course, the projections are completely different. And I looked at the council's projections for the various wards, and Huntly's projections in the next five or 6 years nearly doubled. Yeah. Now, this is households, not voters. I have to say that.
Okay, just on that, Tony, look, and your time's up, but I'll just say in that we actually don't have provision to top load it with future population. The only way you can counter that is do a representation review more regularly than every 6 years.
Right. Yeah, I appreciate that. And obviously 2013, 2019, the next one will be 2025. I suppose that the real basis that I'm pushing back on what's been done is I think it was rushed, and not by anything other than the fact that the government suddenly said, "Oh, okay, we're going to change the rules," and they did that on and you made the decision on the 20th of May, which is pretty short notice for council staff to sort of run around and get all this work done. I mean, I know it's not easy, and I do appreciate what they've done. But as a Huntly resident, and definitely not a Narrawarrah resident, I think pushing the two together is not a good idea.
All right, Tony, thank you very much for your submission. Do appreciate you coming online and presenting it too.
Not a problem.
Okay.
I'll leave. I've got a leave button.
Beside the mute one. All right.
Mayor Allen, we have Sue in the waiting room for Tamahere Community Committee.
Sue Robinson.
Yes.
Okay.
So submission 1924, page 207.
All right. So bring her in. I just have to go back and find. What page was it?
207.
207. All right. Afternoon, Sue. Turn your microphone on, Sue.
So Mayor Allen, we also have Leo Coppins, who is part of TCC and is speaking next. Sue, are you happy for him to come in now?
Overwhelmingly in support of the committee's proposal.
Who's got the radio going in the background? Turn it off, please.
And this informed the response to the...
Leo, turn your radio off. Right. Do you want Leo to be in microphone on as well, Sue? And which one he is presenting? Turn your mic on, Sue.
I'm sorry, I thought I was just muted, and I've been listening to the live stream, so it's probably me that had the radio on.
I blamed Leo because he was the last one on and I could hear him.
No, I think it was me.
All right, so look, I'll let you kick off then. The story, we've got your submission, we've read it, 10 minutes, including any questions.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for this opportunity to submit on behalf of the Tamahere Community Committee. We've really only commented majorly on the effects on the Tamahere ward, and most strongly through talking with people in our area, we're not really keen on the 3-councillor wider Newcastle Tamahere ward structure. And in fact, I was listening to the previous speaker who was talking about part of the Eureka ward perhaps joining with Martingi and Tamahere, and I believe that would make a lot more sense from our point of view, although that hasn't been canvassed in the submission that we put in. I think that representation is a lot about relationships, both within our community and within council, and to put Tamahere and Newcastle and the lower end of Hukanui into one ward and say that they've got lots of community of interest similarities is partially true, but I don't think for the intent of what the council's trying to do here is actually the right way to go. Our children all go to different schools in Hamilton. We shop at different places. We use different facilities. We believe that the relationships that we build up through a community committee with our community and through our councillor to the council, and these relationships are with staff and with elected representatives are very, very important. And we've noticed through a long period of time how the importance of these relationships growing improves the whole situation for everybody. We have a great fear if we're in a group with 3 councillors that these councillors won't be elected from specific areas within that larger ward, and that in actual fact what could end up happening is that the councillors do end up aligning with a specific area in the ward for pure expediency, and we're making a mockery of putting it all together. So we would like to see that if there's 3 councillors, then there's 3 more specific geographic locations. We believe those relationships will be stronger, they'll be more efficient, and we won't be in a situation of who's coming to a meeting this week, who's working harder for us, whose priorities are here or are they there or whatever. We can't see a real need to change as long as our numbers, we understand that the numbers that councillors represent are pretty important in this whole strategic review, and understand that boundaries may alter to get the mesh blocks in certain positions so that it meets the formula. But we'd like to see that the each of the councillors represent more specific areas, particularly where there's a large concentration of people in a similar area. Specific knowledge of the region and the community, along with specific knowledge of the people, goes a long way from our experience in making the community run well and having a good representation at council. And I think having 3 people, there's a very strong situation where it may go pear-shaped in that one person thinks someone else is doing something. The person with the problem, do they just go to 1 councillor? Do they go to 3 councillors? It just opens a can of worms. We think that the representation is the key thing here. So we would definitely and very strongly like you to reconsider putting us into an area that spans virtually the whole circumference of Hamilton City, and to look at breaking that up smaller. We have no problems if the boundaries are moved to make that work better, but if that was going to happen, we'd prefer them to be moved to communities that are adjacent to ours and not completely on the other side of the city. And that's no offence to Newcastle or any of the people there, no offence whatsoever. We've been experiencing great change in Tamahere, and if we hadn't had the good relationships that we've built up through our representation with our councillors and with the council staff and elected representatives, we don't think we would have got as far as we have today. And we've still got quite a few challenges ahead of us. So we think that it's very important that we feel we're on solid ground. So we definitely would like to stay as a community committee, and we will be reviewing targeted rating situations as council is moving to. But yes, we do look forward to what happens with this representation review. Just as an aside before I finish, we were wondering in the numbers that were presented in the review about how the number of Maori voters or the Maori roll was treated when coming up with the mesh block numbering in the wards, because obviously if there was higher concentrations of the Maori voters in the population in various wards, that could have an effect on the numbers that each councillor would then be representing. So thanks for this opportunity.
Look, you're welcome, Sue. Has anybody got any questions for Sue? Councillor Patterson, then Councillor Wilton.
Thank you, Sue. So by the submission, the Tamahere Community Committee would support the splitting of the horseshoe and where that is, you know, I can't say that right now, but maybe say Holland Road, Puketaha Road, heading across to the east, but also that Tamahere ward area picking up the southernmost of that rural eastern, which, you know, picks up Telfaro, etc. Does that make more sense?
To me, it does. Our community has not actually looked at that as an option, apart from discussing. We didn't put it to them because that's not what we were feeding back on, but it would definitely be better than the whole horseshoe. I like that analogy, a horseshoe.
Yeah. Yeah. No, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Willerton.
In actual fact, I don't know why I'm talking. It's exactly the same point. We've heard a lot of people speaking out of Eureka, and Eureka do not want to be in the Hukanui Wairinga, although I can't understand why. And yeah, so they want to be into Tamahere and then cut the horseshoe, and so you probably said the same comment, but yeah.
All right. Thank you, Councillor Church.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, great presentation. Thank you. My question, Sue, is, you know, you're obviously really in touch with your community as a whole. Can you give us some idea of like the extent of the feedback that you've got around wanting to be perhaps a single ward as opposed to a multi-councillor ward, please?
I think the strongest thing that came through was, if it ain't broke, why touch it? Why fix it? And that's the strongest feedback that we got. Why on earth would we change what we've got? It's been working pretty well. We are a growth node, and we've had a lot of extra population coming in, and that sort of means we've got to deal with quite a few things, and we don't always get it right. We're obviously having to move through it as these opportunities arise or problems, and generally people must be pretty happy with the status quo. We really respect the avenue that we have in having one councillor who attends every meeting he's asked to attend. He's always at our community committee meetings. We get very good feedback through him and the council representative that sit on our committee, so that things don't tend to languish too long unless it's almost in the too hard basket. And we would hope that every other community committee or community board can speak in the same vein. We just feel that it becomes very much further divulged if we then have a situation of a tripartite person in charge. Another point that came through was, what if all the people, all the three councillors that get elected are from the Newcastle ward? What do they know about us? You know, we'd end up being quite remote, because we'd feel that we would have lost our representation. I guess it's a bit like a comfort blanket.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Look, time's up. Sorry, Councillor Lynch. What we'll do is we'll actually carry on now, and we'll do Leo's submission. Thanks for that, Sue. Look, you're more welcome to stay there. There may be a question that comes out of Leo's you might want to play a part in. So if Leo turns his microphone on.
Hear me now?
Yeah,
go now,
Leo.
Thank you, Your Worship the Mayor and councillors. Thank you for the opportunity to do this. Much as I hate this kind of Zoom thing, it's what it is, and we'll all do our best with what we can have to deal with. Most of us cannot see what is broke here. It would have been ideal if council had been able to make a case for change. We at Tamahere, as Sue has mentioned, have enjoyed a good relationship with council. We want it to stay that way. We have a strong community committee. We've been fortunate to, in recent times, have had very good councillors who live locally and have a connection. These things are under threat with the proposed changes. Tamahere has little in common with Newcastle. Sorry, Noel. My biggest concern is the low residential participation in local government. It's very low, and I'm sure the council are also concerned about that. But and I've covered some of those points in my written submission as to what they could be about. Engagement is a big challenge for all councils. I cannot see that bumping 3 wards together will improve things. People like to know their councillor. People in Tamihere know their councillor. Our council lives locally, as most councillors do. All of these things could go. Of course, as mentioned, all 3 councillors could come from Tamihere or they could come from Newcastle. Election campaigns will be interesting. A lot of doors to knock on. It just won't happen. I did not see any mention of community committees. This is a concern. Always thought that such committees were valuable. We have been very happy being a committee and saving $95,000. This amalgamation proposal is a worrying trend towards electing all councillors at large. Hamilton is close to doing exactly that. It will be a total disconnect with their communities. All of this may not be relevant, for if this government gets its way, the 3 wards will go, then the district plans will be a local regional, so there will be compelling reasons for a greater Hamilton Council. I hope that Waikato District Council does not let this happen. And that's the end of my submission. Thank you.
Thank you, Leo. Appreciate that. But what I might do is, before Noel comes on and says something about Newcastle Ward, I'll get in first. So you just understand what came out of the commission 3 years ago when it was our proposal was then appealed and went in front of the commissioners and that. And as an outcome of their ruling, they asked us to strongly review this process, which that's what we're doing within a 3-year period. More importantly, they strongly also suggested us we needed to have multi-council awards because we were largely single council awards. Now, as part of this, that was their thought. So we've gone out with something that reflects some of that because we just can't put it all together. Otherwise, everything would just be at large. But what we actually have heard from both of you today is 2 different submitters and also a number of others that you're still happy with single council awards. And we need that to go back to them if that is what we end up with, if you understand my reasoning around that.
Yes.
Yeah, we needed you to push back. So we've got something to use. At the moment, we have nothing to use other than your submissions and us accepting that as a view, as one of those views. Does that help you, Leo?
Yes, it does help, but it's pretty poor form for the Electoral Commission to push councillors into multi-wards when they know the results of these and what's happening in Hamilton with East and West, and it's only a step away from councillors at large. So we do not want that to happen.
Yeah, no, I don't think any of us do, to be honest, Leo. We'll go to Councillor Smith.
Well, I can't help myself. I'll have to stop Leo coming over and getting advice from us from the walkway. So, but look, on a more serious note, the Mayor's probably touched on what I was going to ask about, Leo, in that it's a bit like I think he used the words earlier about if we put the rates up 30%, we'd have a lot of submissions. If we put them up 3%, we get very few. But so on that basis, are you really promoting single wards, single councillors, and local representation means local? I suppose that's go back to single ward council, single councillor wards is what I'm saying.
I certainly am. If we could get away with it, that would be great. But if, as Mayor Allen says, the Electoral Commission wants some action for multi-ward, we'd sooner be linked with the southern parts of the Waikato district and do it that way. If we had perhaps a two council setup, that's still multi-wards, multi-representation. So yes, the answer is yes to your question.
Thank you. Well, that's one way for Newcastle and Tamihere to retain their own names. Thank you.
Sue, did you want to say something, Jane? Turn your mic on, Sue.
On a personal note, I was invited to take part in some focus groups right back at the beginning of this review that the democracy team ran. And I was quite confused when we started that because the status quo was definitely not an option, and the starters for 10 were all about how can we change it, how can we have multi-representation, and I was quite confused by that. But what you've just said, Mayor Allen, about the local government starter for 10, if you like, that they want to move towards that way, probably explains that. And that was one thing that was a bit worrying, in that I felt that the questions that were asked of the focus groups weren't necessarily wide open questions.
Yeah, look, and that's why I said it to both you and Leo. The more people push back on it, gives us the ability to actually do that. But we had a pretty strong stare from them. And I think the fact is a lot of people have mentioned around the fact that they want their local to stay in local. And that's a strong focal point that we need to look at again. But, you know, at the end of the day, we needed you to bite at us. And I think you've done that pretty well. All right, has anyone else got any questions at all? If not, I noticed your ward councillor doesn't want to say anything. He can't be as good as what you think he is.
Oh.
Councillor Willerton.
Yeah, it's probably a comment to Leo that I picked up on the community committee and saving the money. And it's very good to hear that you're very happy with the community committee. And maybe if you expanded on that, because we've had a lot of people wanting boards and the legality of it and things like that. And the question would be, and I hope I'm not leading, do you feel you've been disadvantaged in any way by being a committee?
No, absolutely not. We regard it as service to our community, and the fact we don't operate a bank account is probably a little bit of a pain in the bum, but we've got around it. There's not much money being transacted, so it's okay the way it is. But with the new thing that we heard about the other night about council putting these pots of money into a big pot, one big pot, it may change the game. This is a new development for us as well, what we hear, and it might tempt the Tamihere to look at the other model rather than a committee model.
All right, Councillor Lynch, last one.
Thank you. So this is probably better for Dale to answer Sue's original question that she asked about Māori representation and the Māori electoral roll versus the Māori population.
Okay, so we are required not to use the Māori electoral roll or the general electoral roll, but something slightly different, which is the Māori electoral population and general electoral population. So it is what it is, it's population, so it's under 18 as well. That's what the legislation requires us to use, and that's what we must use. And as at the population estimates as at June 20, we had 14,970 Māori electoral population and 67,870 general electoral population.
So there's very little difference between the two. There's only about 1,000 difference between the two different options there that we worked with. So, yeah. All right, that's all good. Thank you very much, both of you. Appreciate you taking the time out to do this. It is much appreciated, and more importantly, your message is quite important to us as well. So thanks very much, and have a nice weekend, both of you.
Thank you.
Right, who have we got, Charles or?
Yes, Your Worship. Charles Fletcher, 1914, page 234.
Charles, are you there? Can you turn your microphone on?
Unmute.
Yep, no, you're off mute now, Charles. Leave it off. How are
Leave
you
what
anyway?
off? Leave everything off. Turn it all off. I'm good,
Right,
thank you.
Charles. Good to see you. Thanks for submitting, and we'll take your submission as read. Everybody's got it in front of them. Got 10 minutes, including any questions. So the floor is yours for the next 10. Where have you gone, Charles?
I think you've stuck again, Worship.
Oh, we're back. You're back, Charles. You there, Charles?
You can hear me?
No, you're all over the place. Do you want to just turn your video off and just leave your voice on? Oh, you're back down there, Charles. Can you hear me? You there, Charles? I thought Tamahiri had good internet, councillor.
I thought they had fibre too, but Matt's just going to try and ring him on the mobile and see whether he can connect mobile.
Okay.
UFB2 Plus, we do have good internet in most places. I guess everyone at home has probably dragged it down.
Oh, I think that's a common problem around people working from home. And who was I on? I was on with somebody the other day. Who was that? And the kids were using watching movies. Made it hard for them. Hey there, Charles.
Have you got him on the phone, Galen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Matt's talking to him at the moment.
Lost them all together now.
He's on the phone with Matt.
Was he? Okay.
It was his computer, not his internet.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, his computer crashed.
So can he phone him?
He's restarting his computer now. He said he'd prefer to do that.
Okay. All right. So we've got no one else waiting?
No, but I'll give.
No, we're about to ring Caroline Conroy.
Yeah. Can you ring her and see where she is?
Yep.
Well, she's due on in 6 minutes anyway.
unmute.
Mayor Alan Charles is back in.
Back. Where's Charles? You there, Charles?
I'm hiding here somewhere.
Yeah, that sounds a lot better.
Good, excellent. Fiber's suddenly decided it's going to work again.
All right, are you ready to go?
We've read my submissions, and I'm just going to comment that, as we all know, the council has an obligation to undertake this review. It's something that you normally would do every 6 years. I understand that you've been sort of pushed into this a little bit by the powers that be at central government, effectively. And, you know, the objective of this review is to find the best way of providing representation to your communities and to, in the normal way, adjust the board boundaries and the number of councillors and all that sort of stuff. So you know all about all that. But it seems to me that it's a bit sad that red tape and common sense have not mixed very well, and that this proposal is, frankly, a complete cluster, a cross-cutting proposal that will not provide an improvement to our representation. I'm strongly opposed to it and the roots from which it has sprung. It seems that of the 240 submissions made that I'm aware of, 73% of them are opposed to this proposal. Only 10% have indicated support, leaving 17% equivocal. If these 240 submissions represent our democracy in action, then you've got no choice but to scrap this proposal, and I urge you to do so properly and without ceremony. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Charles. Right, has anybody got any questions? No questions. Oh, Councillor Willerton.
Yeah, g'day, Charles. It's probably the same question I've been asking to people in the south, southeast. So the Eureka ward, effectively, they're not happy coming into Hukanui-Waitangi either, and you guys appear to be unhappy about going around in the horseshoe. So would
horseshoe is the horseshoe's an absolute stupidness proposal. I can't understand why anybody come up with a dumb thing like that.
Yeah, so would you be happy to merge with Eureka, or would you still prefer to be on your own?
No. It's just absolutely stupid. You know, I mean, Tamahiri's got its own special needs and special purposes. We've had, you know, roading issues that have been stuffing up our whole area for, you know, the last 10 years. And, you know, the interests or a Eureka-based, you know, councillor or person who lives in Eureka wouldn't have a clue what's going on in Tamahiri and wouldn't understand a damn thing about it. And so from our point of view, that would not work at all.
No, it's cool. I know how you think. Thank you.
Councillor Gibb.
Oh, yes. Hello, Charles. Just a question. So just to clarify, you're happy with the status quo. Is that what you're saying?
Yep, absolutely. It's working really well. So why break something that's already going well?
Okay, so we've now added two Māori ward representatives or two Māori representatives. How do you feel about those numbers? Would you prefer they were added on top or included in our total councillor numbers?
The Māori representation is an issue that's been forced on us by central government, and you know, how it works is, you know, entirely for them and you guys to work out. I see them as being an overlay. So, you know, we've got Māori interests in our ward, and they regularly contribute to, you know, our bits and pieces from time to time. And I know they have a big involvement with and engagement with the council on various issues. So if they've got two representatives that are covering the whole area, well, then that's fine. They are doing their thing that's for a very particular purpose. I see it as potentially leading to some future problems going forward, but at the moment we are having to contend with some PC crap that is just too bad.
Thanks for that, Charles.
Councillor Church.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, thanks, Charles, just for being clear about your opinions and that the current model is not broken. So my question to you is, if this 3 councillor ward does go ahead as an example, and then you end up with potentially 3 councillors from Tamahiri.
Well, why would we?
As an example, like the other areas around that area miss out would you still have the same feeling that you'd still want to be a single council would, or would that change your perception about impact?
No,
Just explain it a bit more.
It's a completely dumb idea, and why anybody's even come up with it, I can't understand. It's just stupid.
All right, Charles. Is there any other questions?
So if we finish up with no councillor representing us, then
Yep. Anyone else got any questions for Charles? If not, thank you very much, Charles. Appreciate you persevering, I would say, to get online.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, have you got Caroline there? You have.
Is Caroline online? Yes.
Okay.
Matt's just going to admit her now. So
Okay.
that is the OTCB submission number 2074, page 53.
Caroline, can you put your
Hello.
mic on? Hello, how are you?
Good, thank you. And yourselves?
Good, good. Thank you. Thank you. Hey, same story. Everybody's read your submission. We've got it in front of us as you speak. You've got 10 minutes, and that includes any questions from any of the council. So the next 10 minutes is all yours.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so I'm chair of the Onifero Tuakau Community Board and speaking on the community board submission. So as Alan said, you have read my submission. So I just think the key things I'd like to focus on is I don't know that the proposal that came out to the public gave sufficient regard to the support that the community has for community boards. It was disappointing to see that there were no plans to expand the number of community boards that currently exist. The board has a much stronger preference for community boards over community committees. Boards are referred to in the legislation, and they are mandated under the various acts. Our biggest, we support Tuakau having a separate community board, but we also want to see a community board for the area colloquially known as south of the river. So that's the Onifero to Te Akau area. There's strong support amongst the community for a community board for that area. We're also very concerned about the proposed ward structure for Port Waikato ward, which basically divides the Glenmurray community in half, and it's not really recognised in community of interest. The Wairinga Pukenui General Ward that most of the Glenmurray community would end up in is not the community that the Glenmurray community looks to in terms of the community of interest. And there's a strong support for Glenmurray remaining within the Port Waikato ward, and also we would question why the Aka Aka community has been added to that area, since it's north of the river and its only access to the port. So the bulk of the Port Waikato ward is through Tuakau, unless it's got a boat. So our suggestion would be that the Aka Aka section joins the Tuakau ward, and then Glenmurray, I presume the population numbers would be similar. The Glenmurray would come into the Port Waikato ward, and we would suggest the boundary for that ward goes up to the Highway 1 on the east, or the river, one or the other. So that's one of the key things that we have. Yeah, and also too, there was certainly talking to our local Maori communities about a division, so that make sure the interests of Northern Maori were recognised within the proposed Maori wards as well. But I'm sure you've had more detailed submissions from Northern Iwi on those factors. So yeah, I'll just take any questions if there's any questions.
Probably start off with Carolyn, just in relation to the iwi one and the two Maori representatives. When we put the proposal out, we said at large because we didn't know where to draw, just being straight up honest here, we didn't know where to draw a line on the map, because we'll be damned if we do and damned if we don't, and we'll get it wrong for sure, and it'll be lambasted for the next 10 years. So we put the challenge to Tainui and the people to actually come up with one, which they actually have, and which does give a north and a south. But I think when you work in that world, they get incredibly possessive about their locations, and we didn't want to be caught up in that tangle. So I think we probably, and I can't confirm that, but I think we do have a solution potentially in that area around the submissions from Tainui. So I'll just leave you on that one. I've got Councillor Patterson.
Yeah, I would completely support that approach, Alan, that it's a discussion with iwi and hapu in the affected areas.
Look, Carolyn, we get lambasted if we start drawing lines between different hapu, different maraes and that. So that's why I gave them the opportunity to work with our staff to come up with one. They have done. I don't have a problem with it, but it's up to the council to work with that going forward.
Thank you.
So, Councillor Patterson.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just to follow on from that, and for Carolyn, is that with Waikato Tainui's submission, they did discuss this exact thing, but their view was to keep it as a whole ward without a boundary, and that for the two candidates to then work on a north-south approach, and the best way that they could work that together, especially during the first term of this new system, and sort of learn as they go along. So.
Yeah, I think you do need to make sure you talk to local iwi in the North Waikato region, because they may not necessarily think that Tainui speak for all of them.
And I think we're very aware of that, Carolyn, very, very aware of that. But it's unfortunately for the majority within Tainui within Tainui or within the Waikato, actually sit predominantly in Huntly and Ngaruawahia. And then there's scatterings to the north, to the west, and then around the district. So that's what made it so difficult to draw lines on maps. Righto. Finished, Councillor Willerton.
Yeah, thanks for that. So the question is, Carolyn, or Carol, if we put Glen Murray into Port Waikato, and then it ends up being on a higher percentage, one of the statements is that so I just wonder how you feel about that.
I think the percentages need to be looked at, because it's skewed, because the Tamahiri ward is only 93%. So I think numbers can be adjusted. Most of the wards that you have are over 100%. So there's some adjustment that could be done to actually bring them more into either closer to 100% or slightly under, because I think having one at 93% is skewing the others.
Yeah, no, that's cool. It's just because that will change the group, but then we'll have to do a bigger rearrange. So thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for your submission, Caroline. A question I asked Bruce Cameron this morning, and I'm interested to hear your response to the same question. Have you considered the possibility with where the proposed boundaries are for Glen Murray, with somewhat of a split through the community, could be advantageous to the Glen Murray community and lend itself to actually having two elected councillors representing Glen Murray?
Yeah, no, that's not, we did talk about that, and that's not what we believe. We actually were more and more worried about the fact that the proposed ward is so big and so long that you could end up with two councillors from a more urban area, and they never venture up to Glen Murray, and they don't understand Glen Murray issues. So we don't want that. We will want to be in one area. We're one community.
You did discuss that.
We have discussed that, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so any other questions for Carolyn? None? All right, thanks, Carolyn. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Ka pai.
Okay. Bye-bye. Rightio, everyone. Who have we got online? We've got everybody? Got who should be here? Eugene, where's Rob? presume he's there. Okay. All right, everybody. Well, we need to do a bit of summing up, and I need to, as I said, I've got an hour. That's all right. I hope it doesn't take a flaming hour though. So yeah, look, I'm going to get Axel to lead off here in relation. He's dealing with the map side of it. I'll deal with some of the other stuff of it. So how do you want to do this, Axel?
Well, the two are sort of intertwined, really, because there's some overall philosophical points that will then inform Anton. Anton, do you want to turn your Zoom on so we can eyeball you and see how much you're squirming or how much you're smiling? Yes, I'm just wondering whether we need to get some of those philosophical things right as well, rather than just sort of dive straight into what next we might want to see. Do you know what I mean? The philosophy feeds the direction. I'm happy to lead that off, or do you want to talk about the philosophical?
I suppose, look, I'll start from the back and go to the front. So we've heard today from a number of people out of the so I think southeast and to the south, as we did from the north and the north-south yesterday, and even some more of those today, in relation to the scope and size of the Wairanga Hukanui General Ward, and what people's feelings are in relation to that. I suppose that's one thing. So basically, is there any comments or any work that you want Anton to go away? And I don't want ideas from every one of you, because that's not going to work. I want to understand, what people's feelings are, and leaving it to entirety, or actually breaking it up, I suppose is what we need to look at. Never mind where the boundaries are. Is it left at a two-ward council or a single one? Councillor Sedgwick first. Still use the emoji, please. Just helps me stack you all.
I have my emoji up.
Yeah, I know you did. The others didn't.
Oh, okay. I think what we've heard is everything has a domino effect, as we know, and Anton will concur, because we've heard from the northern part that they don't want to be broken up. So the Mangatangi, Maramaru, etc., didn't want to be broken up. Te Kaupara wanted to be urban, and the general feeling was that it didn't have a correlation with other areas in the ward. So at the very south, they were quite distinct about they wanted to be southern facing, not northern facing. I think if I had my druthers on this, I would like to see at a high level, is the ward capable of being split in two? And then there seems to be two minor issues, and forgive me, I don't mean they're minor, but if you have the philosophical two wards, then you have the Eureka Matangi area and the Mangatangi area who need to be dealt with. So that would be probably my overview on it from what I've heard today.
I'll just go to Dale next before I go to Councillor Smith. Dale, I just explained to somebody about getting feedback around still wanting to see single ward representation. You think there's enough evidence to actually build a case to facilitate that? I'm not saying across the whole district, but I'm just, if we start cutting these up, do you think there's enough evidence to give us what we need?
Yes, I believe so. I think we've got a number of submissions or submitters that have said they want to, or they prefer the single member wards because it provides more effective representation. So I think that's a good argument.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. I just wanted to hear it from you in case I was shooting smoke the wrong way. Councillor Smith. Microphone.
Yeah, just doing it. Thanks. Probably on the same lines, to be honest, is that the likes of the submissions from the Tamihiri, that area, whether there's some way of incorporating some of that Taupori in in fact, by the sounds of it, everybody that appeared wanted to divorce Newcastle. I'm happy with that, if that has to be the case. Ngaruawahia Huntly, we heard some good argument about splitting that back. And up in the north, taking in the Aka, and so I would like to see some of that tweaking to reflect the submissions, and as early as possible, so that we can have an idea and think about what that all means. Yeah, so I think we've heard, and I think Charles has analysed it, 73% are against what we've proposed. That's a high figure, a couple of hundred submissions. So we've got to really try and reflect what the community is telling us. Thanks.
I think when I raised the issue around single ward council, I used that Eastern, but it actually applies to other wards. So
Yeah,
that's why I just wanted to get that clarity from Dale as to whether that we do have a strong enough case to go back that way, because if we actually hadn't done this in this way, we wouldn't have had a case to use. So I think it probably gives us a bit of strength.
And that's I'm sorry if I can just finish then. That's what I was saying, and that likes of the Tamahiri, and like if you took Newcastle out, you might end up closer back to Horatu than people are talking Holland Road. But then does that give the flexibility with the two remaining councillors to look at the Taufari? So you're right. It's all those issues that people have raised. We're not going to land anywhere where everybody is happy, but we can make people more happy than what they are now.
Yeah, and I think we can prove through reworking some of this that we've actually have listened to the community. And not everybody will be happy, but we do have I would say the ability now to actually make some changes. Councillor Gibb.
Yep. Sorry, Janet. I'm just thinking we're now actually diving into the maps and the very specific, as opposed to those overall principles or the philosophical principles, which I thought would perhaps inform the rest. So my bad if I lost, if I didn't think that was a good direction, or if you don't think, Marilyn, it's a good direction.
No. I think what I sort of started off there because I wanted to have the discussion around, there's a number of them. I look at both that Eastern Ward. I look at the Huntly Ngaruawahia situation. My philosophical belief is what I'm seeing here now is people want those split. I don't have an issue with that, but I just needed to, because I think that will play a big part in setting up the rest of it.
Yeah. So perhaps if I could, sorry, Janet, perhaps if I could just go through what I think are the philosophical high-level points that I've heard, like put up a straw man, and then I think it's really important that everyone gets a say on what they've heard, because it's just, what is that acceptable?
Yeah, go for it.
No.
She don't like straw man.
So what I heard in no particular order is that we perhaps have allowed insufficiently for growth in the north. So in other words, we've gone under in a percentage in the south, and that's actually caused some pressure in the north. That's one point. Secondly, that the theme of one councillor per smaller ward has come through consistently in submissions, in spite of our desire to listen to the direction of multi-councillor wards.
So, excellent. Can I just ask clarification? Are you asking us to agree or disagree, or are you just going through a list now?
I'm just going through a list of what I think are some of the philosophical themes, and I think it's worthwhile starting there, because if we dive into which road should we adjust the boundary to too quickly, it's going to be difficult for Anton to take away. He's inevitably going to compromise, so it helps having the principles first.
Yeah, but that's what I'm asking. Is that very first statement you made? I might not agree with it, but so we're going to talk about that at the end of the list that you're creating.
I think so, yeah, and it'd be useful for Anton, and Anton, please nod if I'm on the right track. Thank you. Because there are going to be lots of compromises made. So it's important for Anton to know at the higher level what are the sort of principles that are coming through, as opposed to which road exactly. And everyone should have a chance to speak at the end of this, of course. We heard correctly the protection of the rural voice in trying to do this, whether we've got it right or not, but certainly, again, protecting that rural voice came through strongly, I think, through submissions. In terms of number of councillors and what we do with this, I'm not sure, but a small number of people said, and only one by oral submission, go to a smaller number. Most were neutral or didn't comment on it, but actually quite a number of people suggested 14 to 16 in total. So I just put that for what it's worth. That was one of the things I heard or read. And also concern around the Māori wards potentially being too big to be handled. So those are the philosophical points I heard. And I just wanted perhaps to comment on those first, or to add to or to disagree with, etc. So Janet, I think
you probably covered most of them. Janet.
I might have missed it. One other one was not splitting communities. Did you have that on your list?
I didn't, but that's what we tried to do from the very beginning. But yeah, absolutely, keeping communities of interest together.
Yes, we did try, but there were some key ones that have identified that we're splitting them. I don't need to repeat who they are. I think you all heard that.
Can I just say to that though, Janet, and I heard that loud and clear too. And all I would say is using mesh blocks is a very, very blunt tool. So it doesn't matter where you draw a line, you will split some communities. It's just inevitable. You can't help it. Some communities are bigger than others, and the line will go somewhere. It has to go somewhere. You just try and minimize it, or do you just play to the ones that don't like it? And that's what you'll have to decide.
Yeah, and I do understand that. I was just particularly concerned about the ones, I think it was Mercer in particular, that I felt they had a very strong submission, and the Tiako, either side of the road, quite a strong submission. I have managed to send Axel an email with my thoughts on push me, pull me, because that's a bit like what it seems. I agree that some of the areas are too large, and the Wairinga Hukanui one, we perhaps do need to, shrink it. And there seems to be some good submissions around the areas that could be moved across to other wards. So I'd quite like to see some remodelling of that, and what the numbers turn out to be, and how many councillors that would mean overall, which might help us determine whether we're needing to go down or up on councillors. But I'll leave it for others to talk about.
Someone suggested only 6.
Someone did. I can see value in that, but we would then need to have a lot of community boards added.
Yeah, I know. That's not feasible. Councillor Maguire.
Thank you. I just start off with community boards. I support the Onofero or the Port Waikato ward having a board there. I think it might help in the roading issues and give an overall bit of more weight to it. I've never been keen on community boards, but I'm prepared to support that one. And also the Raglan one, I think should cover the whole ward, just because one part of the ward focuses more on Hamilton. Doesn't mean to say there shouldn't be in the community board area. And the submissions that have come from Taupori, Eureka, Newstead and Matangi, I support looking at that again. I feel they're more that way than they are north. And I honestly believe, Noel, that the horseshoe should be split in half or reorganised. Sorry about that, but that's where I come from on that one. And
Ron, can I just answer one of the things you said about the Raglan Community Board covering the whole ward? That's not what the Community Board actually asked for. They didn't ask for that. And if we were, and I'm not saying we're going to, but if we were to leave Raglan Ward as it is, I can tell you now the people in Te Akau won't suck that up. They don't even like what we've come up with here now. And I think John Jackson was pretty clear on that. So,
but he said he hadn't discussed it with his team outside of himself.
Yeah.
So
yeah, but
just,
it still wasn't a point the community board pushed though, Rob.
Yeah, well, that's just my thoughts. I just thought, you know, if you got a community board, it should be rural and urban.
Rightio, Councillor Church.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just from that strategic point of view, I agree with the discussions we're heading for, and thank you, actually, for some of that summations. I agree with what Janet said around those communities of interest. We know, we remind my memory of this last two representations around community of interest. It was only Mercer that had been split primarily in their last two, whether it was good luck or goodwill. But this time we seem to have had more than one community split. So that was just, I think Mercer's an example of that feedback as to what happens if we don't get those mesh blocks right. So my input into the strategic position is the mesh blocks seem to be the trump card over and above things like, which it was this very common phrase I heard of communities of interest, particularly. Obviously there's that one around the strong relationship that communities had with their councillor and single wards. I totally got that message. But the other one I got was communities of interest, communities of interest, communities of interest, and the feedback being then, yeah, but mesh blocks. So one, I've never seen a mesh block map. Two, how legislatively do we have to fit exactly to that mesh blocks? And three, the conversation, as Axel said, around, yes, there's an issue around the percentages of growth in lots of nodes, like, you know, in the north, like absolutely on that page, as well as, you know, around the Hamilton border, absolutely understand why that we're at the lower end of 90%. But when we're looking at mesh blocks or communities of interest and growth, I think the top of the line things we really have to look at. Is there a story, for example, Dale, where we're saying X, Y, and Z, we need to be low because we've identified, I'm pulling one out of the hat, Taupiri, as an example, has to be at X percentage because you're based on this, but we actually, in the reality, know the submissions and know where we're going. And also that the mesh blocks don't work because mesh blocks aren't as important as, say, communities of interest. So I'm really trying to get a bit of a landscape as to this clunky 2013 rule versus what all of these people have been saying and that I'm picking up. So just kind of want a bit more understanding of, because we seem to be very hampered by this blunt tool, as someone just said before.
I'll get Dale to answer that. He's already done it once this afternoon, but I'll get him to do it again.
Communities of interest do, so those submitters are quite right. Communities of interest do, if you like to use the term, trump, after they are really important. And the legislation amendment in 2013 did allow for us to go outside that plus or minus 10% so that we don't split a community. And that would apply, you know, for the likes of Glenmurray or Te Akau, that we need to, I think, have a look at those as well so that we're not seen to be splitting communities of interest. However, the smallest statistical unit is a mesh block. And we can't split a mesh block. So we have to go, there are mesh block maps, and that's what we use. And that's what we cannot sort of go any smaller than a mesh block. So we're stuck with those by legislation.
Okay, so can we have a mesh block map? We'll just understand that a bit better. But yeah, I guess it's that community of interest that come through to me as a strong, if we're going to have us talking about stairs without talking about specifics, growth in nodes, mesh communities of interest, and obviously that really strong relationship, you know, which has surprised me a little bit around, because we're a dual council ward up in the north, how the strong relationships, which is I guess an acknowledgement of the good work that councillors have done with the communities around that single ward idea. So yeah, those are three things I'd like to say.
All right, Councillor Patterson.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, Jackie, that's a good point. I sort of touched on that a bit yesterday, and you know, we sort of learned a bit today that mesh blocks kill communities pretty simply. So And also too, which was, I was going to ask the other same questions, as because Feds had mentioned that the plus minus 10% can be breached. So Dale, you've just sort of answered that for me. Also, I just want to point out a few things that I've picked up from these submissions. So first of all, I have an opinion on this, talking about Pokeno Tuakau, whether it's split or not. I'd take Jackie's and Stephanie's views on that and support that. Glen Murray, I feel as though it needs to be back in the Port Waikato ward and not split. Aka Aka needs to go in with Tuakau. This is what all of my take actually. 3, whatever put down here, the Tauwhare area and probably south of State Highway 26 needs to come into probably the Tamahere ward and split the Tamahere ward up Newcastle around the Horotū area. So then having 2 councillors in that Tamahere Eureka South Ward, which will then reduce the eastern rural ward. Also then going to the central ward, possibly looking, because there's a strong thing to split those two, and thinking of John's submission and some other submissions about Te Kaupara needing to be more urban. So with the central ward, and this is Janet touched on it before, so it's probably is pretty much similar to it, plus a few more bits and pieces, is including the Huntly, Hiniwai, Te Kaupara area as a ward and having 2 councillors. Newcastle, Ngāruawāhia, Horotū, Taupiri area having 2 councillors. So therefore, you're still going to have the same amount of councillors as we've talked about, 11 plus 2 Māori ward councillors. So that's sort of my take on it. What else? That's pretty much it, really. It's just working out where that Tamahere area is, south or more, but further north of that, which also reduces, takes the east ward down to 1 councillor, but it reduces the length of that, the north-south length of that area. So pretty much similar to what
Tom's sake, it's as simple as that, but I don't think it will be something.
I know that's all disregarding the mesh blocks and how it works, but I think if we look at more communities of interest and sort of push out those plus minus 10% on mesh blocks, we might be a bit closer to what our communities want.
I think the only thing is when Dale talks about stretching the mesh blocks for communities of interest, I don't realistically, I would suggest, Dale, they're not going to accept something at 140 or 150%. It's going to have to be in a plus and minus there somewhere.
Yeah. And so yes, I don't know.
Yes, you're quite right. They will not accept.
That would give the central, the Huntly North area 2 councillors, the Newcastle Ngāruawāhia area 2 councillors, the Tamahere area 2 councillors, etc.
So you're suggesting joining TK and Huntly together?
Yeah, as that strip, TK and Hiniwai.
I can see your fellow councillor from up there nodding their head.
Oh, I can see that too. I was just working on the more of the thing of the submissions coming in as Te Kaupara wants to be more urban than rural.
Mind you, I got to say it's more rural than it is an urban now. It just happens to have a village in it. That's all. Okay, Councillor Eyre.
Thank you. Can I just suggest going into these deliberations that we almost treat it like almost like negotiation, and we look at what we can bargain with. You know, there may not be an opportunity to fulfill every single person's desire or the option one. And bringing to mind, you know, Glen Murray, for argument's sake, if our mesh blocks don't allow us to be able to include the whole community, then maybe we can fulfill and strengthen their concerns for rural representation by offering them, or it's been included in their submission, as being part of, even if they're outside that ward, that they actually be part of a community board. So in that manner, we're doing a little bit of bargaining. So sorry, we can't give you everything you want, but this is what we think will achieve to the same effect your desires. Just a comment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Smith.
Yeah, thank you. I just want some clarity around what Eugene was saying, if I can. We haven't had anyone submit to reconfigure the wards in a different way. Like I wasn't sure whether he was saying put Newcastle and Ngāruawāhia together, which is probably would be resisted as the same as Huntly and Te Kaupara together. I think we heard more that people want single ward councillors rather than us rejigging the proposal in coming up with a different configuration with double wards. So I'm just not sure, Eugene, what you were meaning. And secondly, if you were, as I think you said, I would absolutely be disagreeing with it.
Okay, yeah, no, it was, as I said, there wasn't been something talked about Ngārawahia and Newcastle being put together, but I was more trying to, there's been a strong case of splitting the horseshoe. So you could go with single ward councillors. So you could have Newcastle and you could have Ngārawahia, you could have Huntly and you could have Te Kaupara.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification, because I think the people were telling us they would prefer single ward councillors, that they can have local representation as opposed to rejigging and having multiple council wards, contrary to what we had promoted. Thank you.
And also with multi-ward councillors and having the three and some of the submissions from Tamahiri and that, Leo sort of said they'd sort of support two councillors if it was in that, picked up that southeastern area of the rural ward.
Yeah, I agree with
Charles.
Yeah. I'm not Charles.
All right, Councillor Sedgwick.
I think you just need to be cautious about introducing new ideas that are not supported in any way by any submissions. So if you, for instance, nobody spoke about joining Huntly with Te Kaupara, they spoke about not joining with Ngārawahia. So you're then creating something that hasn't been consulted on and therefore creating an issue. And I also find it interesting, forgive me if I misread this, but I didn't find any submissions from Ngārawahia at all. So I take from that they were comfortable with it. The main thrust came from Huntly not being comfortable with it.
Yeah, if I could answer that, you're absolutely right, Jan. The Ngārawahia Community Board workshop didn't probably shared it with, and probably had discussed it with a few people. That was one of the questions I was going to ask David White, but we got cut off. Ngārawahia seemed to be pretty neutral on that central ward. So I was just going off the submissions that mainly, pretty much come from Huntly about the split. So, and you're probably correct that probably nobody talked about Newcastle and Ngārawahia, Huntly, Te Kaupara, but you could quite easily split those into 4 instead of 2. Have single council wards, which would fit the submissions.
I'm going to hear from lovely Councillor Thompson from out on the West Coast.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. I just actually wanted to say, for me, from the Whangaroa ward, I guess, to Jan's point and to the kōrero that Eugene has just shared, that we had very little voice from Whangaroa in terms of for or against, other than the support, toward extending the Raglan Community Board area. And whether that's because we're probably one of the winners in terms of we still remain as a whole, as a community, we're not losing anything. But I'm really cognizant of the kōrero from, my northern counterparts across the harbour here around not splitting Te Ako, even though there is some crossover, particularly with the community at Te Ako Landing, who probably, look to Raglan. And I really, and I sent Axel a little email just before, what really resonated for me today was, the reinforcement of from the people that live within our communities around the communities of interest, as opposed to understanding what we do with the mesh blocks. And Ross McLean, when he was from Mercer, and his passion about their people really identifying that the river is part of them and they're part of the river, and that they really belong to that area. And I guess that's what I've heard from many of the submitters today, how their communities are their communities. So, and I acknowledge that this is really tricky. But I just wanted to say, it's with the central wards, it never made any sense to me personally that Glen Afton or Pukemeadow would be part of the Whangaroa ward, and so too with Glen Massey, because they have no connection here. And I think that goes to Chris Rayner's point in his submission from the Raglan Community Board, but he did it as an individual. He can't see the connection himself with Glen Massey being part of here. So we've got lots of considerations to do, and I look forward to, mulling over what I've listened to over the weekend, and looking forward to collaborating with all my fellow councillors and what we come up with.
All right, no, very, very good. Good to hear your view. Councillor Willerton.
I'll start off with a question first that I didn't hear the answer for that came up from the Kasuf's submission. Can the Māori people on the electoral roll vote for someone on a community board?
Yeah.
It's not an issue. Okay, that's fine. That's not an issue. It was just something never got answered.
They're two different things. So as long as you live within the community board zone, it doesn't matter which electoral roll you're on.
Yep. No, that's cool. And something I heard loud and clear was, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Single ward councillors representing one person representing us. So to me, when you take the Māori electoral ward people out, it really affects Raglan, maybe to a lesser extent Tuakau, Huntly and Ngaruahia. So the rest of the ward, I would see if we can keep it as similar as it is, because that seems people are happy with the boundaries we have now. So the Tamahiri, they want to stay on their own. Eureka was saying they wanted to be with Tamahiri. They never had the option of saying they wanted to be on their own. So had we given them that option, I'm sure they would have said that's what they want. So that's something that I would be looking at. And going through, so those are the big things. I think that when we talk about boards versus committees, that's something that we need to approach in the future and actually have a discussion with the communities and just actually go through and say, well, what is the difference? Where are we? How can it be? Show them the cost and the benefits both ways, so they can then make an informed decision rather than just getting one point of view. So there's a few standout things, but I mean, I've got to be careful because I think we still need to leave something for deliberations. So that's my viewpoint on a lot of it.
Well, you've actually started your deliberations. So that's what this is about. So this is the start. So what we need a bit of guidance from you around some of the touch points. And I don't think there's a lot of this, the similar ones among yourselves around certain things, but we just needed to look at some stuff over the weekend with Anton. So Axel and I will meet with Anton tomorrow and try and help to give him some guidance. It doesn't mean to say it'll be perfect, but we'll take that feedback and try and implement it in some way or another to what it could look like if you was to split these wards up and reshape them in some other form to get the same outcome.
Yeah, well, it's saying Mangataupuri, and they actually seem to me, and Maramarua actually prefer to come into Tikawhara rather than going to Pokeno. So I think it's trying to keep the population out of Pokeno would be how I'd be trying to look at it, because if we push them into Pokeno, well, then they're just going to balloon out. So that's a touch point that we need to look with the mesh blocks. And the Hukanui-Warringah ward, that's obviously going to go down to one councillor, and I think that's going to be just pushed around depending on. That's a ward that'll be pushed and pulled depending on to suit other wards. Like maybe we can keep coming in between Tamahiri and Newcastle if it needs to, or pushing back out because it's quite flexible.
Before I go to Councillor Henderson, if I took it literally from the submitters today, we would probably need in the vicinity of 40 councillors because everybody wants their own councillor. And we just know that just don't work. It's not about more representation, it's about better or good representation. Councillor Henderson.
I think I'm much on the same page as everyone else. Discussions of splitting only for a Tuakau Community Board, looking at what that may look like for over the river, extending the community board area as was recommended for Raglan. They know their area and they know what will work for them, and that may be best for them at this point in time. I think maybe we're going to have to look at more than 8 wards. That seems to be a common thread coming through. So whether it's 10 or whether it's 11, not quite sure on that. Looking at putting Aka Aka back with Tuakau. That needs to be looked at. Not quite sure about pulling the bottom of horseshoe as it's upside down, and that's unlucky. So splitting the donut. I think those are things that maybe need to be looked at.
Good one, splitting the donut. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. Okay, Gavin.
I just wanted to respond to something that Councillor Willerton said, and that was go back to the status quo. Well, that was my interpretation of what he said. I don't think that's what the submitters said. I think the submitters said in specific cases they felt it should be the same, but that doesn't necessarily mean completely across the board, or I didn't interpret it that way. The other thing is this conversation around community boards and community committees is challenging because community committees are not part of a representation review process. So somehow you have to divorce that from that conversation and simply deal with the areas where you believe community boards should operate based on the submissions that you've had. Dale, I'm right on that, aren't I?
Yep.
Yeah.
Pretty right, Gavin.
Okay.
Councillor Lynch.
I'm really stunned that no one from Ngaruawahia put in a submission. Like the community board weren't interested in putting in a submission either way. And that really surprises me that they're not interested in it. But is there any, could there not be a case for Huntly, Ohiniwai and Pukamero, one ward with one councillor, Ngaruawahia and Taupiri with one ward with one councillor?
Can you run me by that again, sorry?
Could a case be made for Huntly, Pukamero, Ohiniwai, one ward, one councillor, Ngaruawahia and Taupiri, one ward, one councillor?
Yeah, and that's what I said at the beginning, that there is a possibility and there's enough evidence through submissions to actually split them if you so wish to. And that is a possibility, yes. I'm not going to say it is, but I think just back to Councillor Wilton's point around, the status quo point, because we have pulled a portion of the population out of the general area, being the Māori representation, that has actually made it more difficult for us to get the numbers to work. Doesn't mean to say we can't get them to work, but what it will require is some people to actually have compromise, because not everybody's going to get everything they want out of this, and some people feel more strongly about certain things than others. Just want that to be quite clear here. Councillor Eyre.
Just a bit of clarification for my own mind on the proposition for status quo. It came through, and correct me if I'm wrong, but one of our last submitters, Charles, that's what he was basically speaking to, status quo for the whole district. Am I correct in interpreting that or not? Did anybody else have a different view?
His words were, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But Charles, unfortunately, doesn't have to deal with what we have to deal with. It's not broken, but it needs fixing. Let's put it that way.
No, but it does give us scope. Does it give us scope to consider the status quo? It doesn't.
No, if you go back to the commissioners, and Dale will probably back me up here, they'll just take it out of your hands and they'll create something that none of us will like. And that's what's happened to some councils in the past. I think that's what happened to Franklin about 18 years ago, I think, Dale, from memory. Right. Anyone else?
Well, and I'd have to say, just in response to that, that the whilst there's broad scope within the submissions we've had, in my view, Carolyn, I'm not sure what you sort of heard, but the bulk of submissions were not in favour of the status quo. There were certainly submissions to change what's proposed, but to wholesale return to what we have, which isn't even really possible because of the Māori awards being introduced anyway, but I didn't really hear that as a theme through through submitters. That's my view.
No, I wasn't meaning a theme. I was specifically meaning Charles's submission.
And it was only Charles' submission, his verbal, actually. Gavin.
So again, if you were thinking about even getting as close as you could to the status quo, you've then got to really start by how many councillors are you going to have? Because if you go back with the same number of wards, close, similar boundaries, then effectively you're going to have 2 additional councillors with 2 Maori councillors. So that's something else that you have to consider. Dale, is it best to consider the number of councillors first before you consider the wards, or vice versa?
The order under the guidance is you identify your communities of interest first, and then you see how many councillors then do you have wards or not, and then how many councillors per ward. And then the final one is that fair representation. So each councillor represents about the same number of people. So your first thing, what I'm concerned about here is we're going back almost to square one, and we don't have a lot of time. But if you want to do that, and you have to really go back to.
Yeah, look, and that's how I'm reading it. I don't think we can go back to square one. That's why I made mention is when you take out the Maori electorate, you have to reconfigure everything from there on. You can get some synergy of something that'll probably end up looking similar, or not even that similar, but because you've pulled a large population out of your district. So you've got to figure out what works. And that's why I say everybody here is going to have to give a little bit to get anywhere across the line. So I think what Anton will come back with is not likely to be the same as the one you've got today. But in saying that, it's not going to be the same one you operate under currently either, because you just can't do that. You will get a caning for that. Because they're not stupid. 2 of these people are ex-mayors. They've been around the traps. So they know what's going on here. Councillor Wilton.
Yeah, well, I suppose the status quo, because there's also the submissions that we've read too that we weren't heard to. So that says quite a bit of if it's not broken, don't fix it. And of course, we're not going to get 2 councillors in Narohi here anymore, or in Huntly, and so therefore nothing will be the same. But it's just there are some synergies, and people are liking the boundaries. And then we just don't want to be forcing 2 councillors into 1 ward, and then they're not being happy about that either. So, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Been around the room. Councillor Beck.
Yes, I was just going to, if we sort of were coming to a bit of a close of it, and I'm conscious of time, I was going to just try and maybe pull some themes together just for absolute clarity for Anton. But if there's others, because I saw a whole lot of hands go up just now, maybe I'll just hold that in reserve. But I'm ready to try and summarise when everyone's had a speak.
All right, Councillor Church, you got a minute then, and so the rest of you that have got your hand up.
Yeah, 2 things. Yeah, I think we also want to be very cognizant of the feedback that we've got over the last 2 representation reviews, particularly around representation equality, and just really take that as a guiding line, because in listening to the seriousness of those independent commissioners as to what their feedback was around those things, Anton, I think, and Axel, and also just on the discussions around community boards and community committees. Is it possible, because I did talk about I've just Googled and seen rural community boards, but I don't have any idea what that means or how it works or information. And I don't know if it's possible, perhaps through Democracy, we can, or Dale, that we can have a bit of feedback, maybe in a written email to us to help us guide us on some of that thing with that really strong voice from the rural south of the Waikato River, just because I have no idea. Okay, so that any informational guidance would be helpful as to, and yeah, I'm not sure where that come from, whether it's Dale or Democracy.
Dale, I did have it, but I don't seem to be able to find it now. It was sent to me by Fran Wild, actually, about 18 months ago, and I stuck it away somewhere, and guess what? I can't find it now. Was I think one of the mayors must have asked the question, and that's why it got sent to all of us, is the premise on why community boards were set up and what was their purpose. And do you have access to that? I can go back to her and get it back off her again, I suppose.
Yeah, and also, you know, if Dale's, even if it's just a couple of paragraphs of point forms, or half a dozen point forms of, obviously we're all pretty au fait about urban community boards. I have no idea what it means, what the word rural community board means, and you've had some experience, obviously, and there's lots of them. So I'd appreciate a little bit of feedback, perhaps as an email over the weekend.
All right, Councillor Gibb.
Yes, I thought this was all going to be high level, so I wasn't getting down to detail before, but I do agree totally that the Horseshoe Ward is too big. It does need to be split somewhere. The other comment that was just made about Huntly and Ngaruawahia current wards being only one councillor in each, it wouldn't be if you just stretched them. So that's why in my email to Axel, I have put a couple of ideas down there, because they are, they are urban, and there are urban environments around them. So there are options there. We're successfully in Ngaruawahia anyway. Eugene and I can speak to being successful being 2 in 1 ward. So I think that is something we shouldn't just throw away.
I don't think anybody's throwing it away, but I think the big problem is after you pull the Murray electorate out of both of those seats, it only lends itself to 1 in each. If you want to create it by stretching it, you'll have to stretch it a long way to find another 6,000 people potentially, or 6.5, which means you lose that rural voice, which gets sucked into urban. And we've heard loud and clear the rural people want to maintain their own voice. So you just have to be a bit careful there that you don't appease the urban and disadvantage the rural. And I've said all the way through here, if we're not careful, the rural still make up a big percentage of this community, or the biggest part of it. We've got to actually maintain a voice for them.
I dispute that, actually, because I am bordering rural and urban, being a farmer's wife, and around me are a lot of farms, as well as my urban knowledge and voice there. So I don't think it's exclusive that the councillor is one or the other.
Yeah, but I think you're still not getting what I'm saying. You're turning a 1 cent coin into a 50-cent coin. That's probably what I'm saying to you, because of the diameter of it. That's what happens. Rightio, if there's no more, Axel, have you got anything else?
Yes, I guess I just want to turn, thanks everyone for that. So Anton will need a little bit of freedom and a bit of flexibility, because as we know, the mesh blocks will not lend themselves easily to answer every point raised. So I think what I've heard through this part of the discussion now is that, well, if we start in the north east, that there was a bit of a theme there that have resonated with councillors through the submissions about keeping the 09 prefix or the M towns up there, Mangatangi, Maramarua, Mangatawhi, Miranda, but importantly not Meremere, together. There was talk around Whangamarino Swamp or the Maramarua Forest being sort of natural dividers rather than roads. So that was sort of one point. If we travel to the south, still staying in the east there, obviously the discussions around flexibility around how that southern part might look. Definitely chopping it off the Horseshoe, but then some flexibility, I suppose, about including, Eureka, Martini, possibly Newstead. So you've got some flexibility about how far that goes, how far north that southern part stretches, if I can put it that way. I'm not quite sure where the minus 90, or the 4% below, where that sits within the Horseshoe. I've got no idea actually. So that'll be your challenge. But then when you come to the central part of it around the Horotū, I think what I've heard the councillor saying here is that we would look to a split, and how much goes into central south, which is what Janet was referring to now, is you might look at things like, like Horatu, and you might also start looking to the west for both central south and central north, if I can put it that way, so that we can deal with these Glen Massey, Glen Afton sort of issues and try and keep those as one. And similarly with what goes into Raglan, I think we've heard Lisa say anything on the other side of the harbour is, there's flexibility about where that goes, and it more naturally looks to the north rather than to Raglan itself. But I think, Lisa, if I heard right, certainly looking more towards the city, you could go, further that way or less that way. Is another flexibility, Anton, I think you have based on what we've heard. I think also, and of course, then we've heard in the northwest, very clearly about, Aki and so on going through with Tuakau, and the river becoming more of a natural border there. And the discussions around a community board. If there is a split in the community board at Tuakau, then a board is definitely the preference. I think Onofero was saying prefer to stay as one, but if we had to go separate, then it's a board, not a committee. Tuakau was saying, don't know why, if it ain't broke, why fix it? So they'd rather stay as one. But certainly if you were to look at a split, then it would be as a board. I think those are my main points that I heard. So Glen Murray looking north, Glen Afton looking more to Huntly. That's about it, I think, for me. And I can see hands going up, so I've got some of those.
I'm going to wrap this up in about 30 seconds, so be very quick. Councillor Sedgwick.
Axel, I don't think I heard, sorry, Councillor Beck, I don't think I heard in your summary the many submissions from federated farmers, etc., the rural people in both the east and the west, talking about the size of the Wairinga Okanui ward, and also the submissions from, you missed out where you would see Te Kaupapa sitting. So you went immediately from the north right to the south, and you missed out the middle. So that is something that we have to consider.
Yes, I guess that Anton will give us some guidance on that.
Okay, Anton.
Just from a numbers perspective, one of the very strong messages that I picked up is that there's a very strong feeling of under-representation, and that 106% is not an acceptable number. So there's an immediate tension if any of the boundary changes are proposed that would include going and justifying above 110%, then the noise of under-representation needs to be dealt with. So Aka, if that goes into Tuakau, that is going to be a substantial percentage above 110%. So I'll need some very clear guidance. What will you want to see meeting in the percentage wise, or meeting the communities of interest side of things and the sort of range you would deem acceptable?
All right. We'll have a work on that in the morning, Anton.
Yeah,
that's fair enough. That's a hard, very, very hard, challenging question.
I know, and this is the trouble.
Yeah.
Everybody's got to realise you pull a piece off here and put it over there, it just affects everything on the way down. And it wouldn't matter what model you had, it would do that regardless.
What pushes you back perhaps towards Anton having a 2-councillor ward, Tuakau and something, and letting the community board be the one that reflects Tuakau only.
Yeah. Tony.
I was just going to say, Your Worship, in the context of that conversation and understanding what Dale said around looking at communities of interest first. But to be able to deal with the issue that Anton has just raised, is there interest in considering an additional councillor? Because that would then maybe get the numbers looking better. Because one of the things that I heard in the last couple of days is that a lot of submitters are concerned about the size of the wards. And I know that you started with the premise of trying to not increase the number of overall councillors because you didn't believe that that's what the local government commission would be interested in. But is it something from a practical perspective that needs to be considered?
Look, just to that question of large wards, and I'm sorry, I don't buy into that argument, Tony, or anybody that's listening, because currently you've got Councillor Eyre, who's got the biggest ward of all, from the northern side of the Raglan Harbour all the way up to Port Waikato. Now, I noticed it's never been an issue up until now, so I'm trying to understand why it's become an issue now. Look, I need to close this off because I've got another meeting in about 2 minutes. So,
Alan, just on the point of Tony's point, is if you raise it by one councillor, you give another Mary councillor, so it's effectively 2 councillors to achieve more, to get a general seat.
I think and look, and I was going to raise that when I was leaving. If you do that, the first councillor is a Maori, which means you go to 14, then you have to go to 15 or potentially 16. And look, I'm going to tell you something I've told you all before. The pool isn't any bigger, so you will all contribute to all of their remunerations. And for those councillors coming on, it pushes it down. This was the trap that Waipa fell into last time. The remuneration pool isn't based on how many councillors you've got. It's actually will push your remuneration now. Now, I think you're all way underpaid now. Just imagine what it'll be like if you bring 3 more in. So you take a third out of your salaries now. And I think half of you will just disappear. So just be aware, and I reiterated that to you some time ago. I know we don't do this job for the money, but you should be reimbursed for the effort and time you put in. And a lot of you put a hell of a lot of time and effort in and are poorly paid now. So just remember that. That's why I've always tried to stick to that 13 in total. Noel, and then I'll close out.
Oh, sorry, no, that was my point, Alan. I haven't lowered my hand.
Yeah, look, and I know that would solve the problem around people having more representation, but I tell you what, it'll lead to another problem around the quality of people that'll actually stand, because it's people already say to me now, why the hell do you do what you do and put up with what you put up with for what you get paid? And I do it because, well, I've got the time, I've got the ability to do it, and I do it and I enjoy it. But if I was doing it for money, I wouldn't do this. I'll tell you that right now. So, you know, it's one of those things. I don't want you at disadvantage. And I know our ratepayers won't look at it like that, but you've got to remember it is a struggle, and it's not easy for everybody to be a councillor. The remuneration just goes a small way towards recompensing the effort you put into it. Hey, look, I just want to close out one more thing, though, and it was raised before around the community board. So what I asked Tony at lunchtime to do is, Alison's gone, I've asked Alison through Tony, to come back with some figures around if we created another community board, being that one in the northwest, and I think there's several people have supported that as an alternative to splitting away from Tuakau, which I don't have a problem with, but of course it adds more general rate cost to it. So if we were to go that way, I've actually asked Alison to give me the figures that we spend on what it costs to run community boards, including the targeted rate, so the total amount of funding. And if we agree to that, I'm suggesting that through the annual plan next year, that we actually bring in, and that's why I raised it a number of times, a targeted rate that actually means that people like me that don't have a community board are not paying for a community board. And so Tony will come back with a ballpark figure. Now, it will only be a ballpark figure, but I'm picking it's probably likely to be somewhere between $40 to $50 per rateable property. Good. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. So would that be across all the community boards? So we'd do
Yes.
a revision?
Yep.
Yeah.
So it would, if it costs $1 million to run 6 community boards,
Yep.
people in that 6 community boards will have to fund that instead of everyone else outside it not funding it. I just think that you've got to have some fairness and equity. And it was something that I was going to do for next year's LTP, but this has prompted me to probably look at it to bring it forward. So it's part of an overall package. Councillor Eyre?
Just that question you've asked, Alison, I actually asked a couple of days ago, so I can forward her response to all of you immediately if you like.
Okay, you forward that to me then. Okay, Councillor Church, and then we're gone.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Yeah, looking at that and revising that funding, absolutely. But also that if the targeted rate is in that area, in that community board, that it's spent in that community board, and it's not a district wide, that would be my consideration of that, rather than some supplementing others, and that includes the general rate. Targeted rates are targeted rates.
Okay, so how would it be generated? It'll be generated on the overheads to run all community boards. And at the moment, I would say some of the big ones like Tuakau and that actually cost more than some of the others. So the smaller ones will end up subsidising the big ones. So just realise that too. Like, we can't do a targeted rate for community boards and just do 6 different ones. You've got to do it overall.
Huntley's the most expensive one.
What's that?
Huntley is the most expensive. Huntley is the most expensive one.
Is it? Okay.
Yep.
That doesn't surprise me somehow. I think it's always been the most expensive one from my memory, going back about 7 or 8 years ago when I last looked at it. All right, everybody, thank you very much. We're back in here at 7 o'clock tonight, everybody, except for poor old Dale. He's not. He's a lucky one. So I'm sorry, Dale. We've got work to do tonight. So I've got all the councillors back to do on another issue at 7 till 9 tonight. So I'll see you all